Greetings. This presentation is How to Automate Congress, the Direct Republic Model. The meta concepts we will be discussing are blockchain technology, the Constitution, and legal philosophy. If these topics are outside of your comfort zone, this presentation may get a little hard to follow. A brief overview of the political terrain. The judiciary has no elected officials and is the final arbiter of all of our laws. The stability provided by the lengthy process of ratifying, enforcing, challenging, getting a Supreme Court opinion, and then overturning that opinion is beneficial to prevent rapid oscillation of the law. However, it is a terrible plan when you get a bad law like prohibition or segregation on the books. FISA is nothing more than a corridor of last resort to push any necessary elements of the federal establishment's agenda when all other processes have failed or wouldn't meet a specific time frame. The executive is a mechanical monarchy, very high economic barrier to challenge the federal government effectively, and it makes the playing field very inconsistent. It only consists of entities that can afford it and the issues that they bring to the table. Add to that, the executive makes all the judicial appointments, so with one election, you have two branches of the government mobbed up. The legislature is essentially the hot gates of law. It's supposed to be the control mechanism of the people, their way into the law, and it's now a little more than a choke point. Exacerbating the choke point aspect of the corruption and bureaucracy that have to be addressed essentially exist because of the underlying constitutional mechanics. When you add in the rules and committee mechanics, there's really only about 50 senators or congressmen that end up with any real influence. They end up guarding campaign money for re-elections via the party or any federal funds for that. They'll also cut you off at the knees for any of the programs that your constituents would possibly see. So, there's lots of ways to box a mouthy junior congressman out. This essentially relegates the legislature to having very little effective power. Sometimes they're a hurdle that you have to get over, but not always. The assessed problem is socialism embedded in the Constitution in Article 1, Section 8. It's not common to hear mechanics of this era referred to as socialist because it's 30 years before Marx. In Article 1, Section 8, that's the authorization to tax. No one had the right to delegate this, but there it is. And essentially it's authoritarianism. This creates an economic, legal, and moral hazard by establishing people who are legally immune from their actions. They can make law, enforce law, and essentially steal property. This breaks the economic feedback mechanism to determine whether or not a service is financially viable or even desired, let alone all the moral horrors that come with it. So Article 1, Section 8 has to be removed, but changing this one mechanic in the Constitution drastically alters the entire document. So the first thing we have to do is fix the funding mechanism to have any kind of cohesive system, and then find a way to install the economic feedback so that it doesn't suffer from this problem anymore. Rather than proposing a mechanical framework or a replacement to taxation, we will use a principle framework similar to how Agile project management works. The first principle we will adopt is federalism. The original concept of the 13 colonies was founded on federalism, and Lincoln accidentally broke it, I think. Nowadays, all of the people are just shoehorned into the modern societal template of conforming to society instead of individuals building society for themselves. The original 13 colonies spread out and had their own subset of rules and, further broken down into their counties. In 2017, a solution really can't be imposed on such dense and diverse populations. So we will take federalism all the way down to the individual level. This is not very friendly to a map, but it's very friendly to the humans on it. The second principle we'll adopt is individuality. Even in a federalized environment, we can't mandate everyone be the same. This means everyone gets to make their own choices for good or ill. The third principle we'll adopt is equality. While we cannot make everyone economically equal, we can and need to ensure that everyone is legally equal. This equality must be both philosophically and mechanically secure in this system. To that end, everyone will become their own legislator. And while it sounds counterintuitive, 200 million adults will write better laws than only 550. So the first mechanic we'll install is win-win methodology. It's essentially the opposite of voting. Voting creates a loser because there's only one outcome available. So we're just going to have more than one outcome available. One group wants to do one thing, one group wants to do another. We have separate methods and separate payment systems. That's it. It's federalism expressed in a mechanic. Expressing individuality, we go with voluntary associations and contributions. So you put your money where you want it, you'll get a greater amount of satisfaction out of the system. You also get economic feedback installed, because if you didn't want to pay for it, or you didn't want to pay that much for it, you get an idea of what these systems should look like as opposed to what they do look like. And to ensure equality, and essentially it's the Bill of Rights, you have the right to abstain. By creating positive rights with the Bill of Rights, it started a whole chain of events that created positive rights, which is a bad thing. Just creating the right to abstain allows everyone to walk away from a process, which is essentially the only right you really need. So when I talk about automating Congress, the mechanical change is a de facto change away from the current constitutional republic into a direct republic. This is essentially a direct democracy and a constitutional republic rolled into one. The directness from the direct democracy is kept, but you get rid of the democracy, the voting. The Constitution is removed from the republic, and only a vote-free forum of debate and information exchange is left. I understand that historically a republic always had a democratic function. However, if all republics had to have some sort of inherent democracy in them, then a republic would just be a form of a democracy, and I'm submitting that a republic in and of itself has no voting. That was just a pragmatic effect of what needed to happen way back when people had to travel great distances to get together, etc. This is the 2016 election map. Blue is Clinton, red is Trump. The purpose of this map is to demonstrate how precise our desires can be if we subdivide. Now, if we can imagine this map not representing a presidential election, but how we're going to pay for a particular issue, that's kind of the concept I'm trying to lay down here. There are several examples of city-state arrangements like this around the world. In Europe, I show this one in South Africa because even in a much rougher part of the world, it's not that hard for people to get along with basic civil laws like murder and rape and theft, etc. So while visually unappealing, imagine the purple and the pink and the white could be separate states on this map. However, they would clearly have to have some sort of common basis in law to intelligently interact on such a disjointed level. I don't think you're going to have enough diversity of thought among 535 people to come up with an intelligent basis of laws for 300 million. However, you can get 300 million people to write laws, and they will come out better if constructed from the bottom up. Once everyone is their own legislator, we're going to get the core of our legal system Build-A-Bear style. We're going to start with Title 18 as the bear, and this is criminal law: murder, rape, theft, assault, property crimes, etc. We prune out all the drug laws and statutory nonsense. It's a no shenanigans level here that we're dealing with. This is the bare minimum that we would need to interact as humans. The next thing that goes into the bear is security and penal options. If you would like murder as a capital offense, you can have that. If you would like murder not as a capital offense, you can also have that. Security options will be based largely on where you live. Urban areas will have more resources to afford greater levels of security and greater detail in their level of security. Rural areas have fewer resources. However, they also tend to do their own security as well. So some of these problems end up have some self-mitigating factors. The last thing you end up in the legal system, and where the crazy maps come from, is your preferred set of bylaws. This is essentially assurance against things that you want to protect against. To give a bit of an over-the-top example, if you do international trade deals, you don't want to get a visit from German special forces because some trade deal with Germany went sideways. You're going to be part of some trade guild that will help protect and mitigate these kinds of things because it's within your scope of living, but not the neighbor on either side of your house, so it doesn't apply to them. It really only applies to you. In the same vein, it keeps people away from TTP and NAFTA type deals because they're not bound to them. You could be bound to that, but your neighbors couldn't. To give a different example, the Sierra Club would act essentially as its own EPA. Instead of lobbying Congress for EPA laws, they would just purchase raw land as much as they can get their hands on and then keep that land to a very high standard. And if you were to mess with that land, you're going to end up paying for it. And that's going to be very expensive cleanup, and it's their property. So I think instead of having the lobbying mechanic in place, you get a great deal of satisfaction, a greater deal of satisfaction with having property ownership and preserving that land as those folks see fit. Even if we were to sell them Yosemite National Park to take back some of the, or to pay back some of the debt, we could still do that, and then they would preserve it. And I honestly, I trust the Sierra Club more than I trust anyone at the EPA. Defense is done in a similar way, but that's a very complex issue, very complex. So just to say, it's a similar market solution, but there's a little more complexity to it, and that's kind of its own other presentation. A brief overview of the blockchain. A blockchain is just an open ledger system. While it could be used for much higher order functions like Bitcoin, we're only going to use it as this basic, low-tech open ledger function. By putting all of the public transactions in the open ledger system, the entire public will be able to view what basically goes on behind closed doors, and I'm pretty sure everybody wants this ability if we could furnish it. This will eliminate the need for representation, but in our current system it would lead to a direct democracy. We will work around that problem later. Once the laws are constructed for each individual, the arbitration system is organized in a Brehon fashion. Brehon arbitration existed in Ireland for a few hundred years and was ended by British common law. It's essentially a free market solution, a decentralized, non-monopolized arbitration process. Once the state is no longer in charge of the arbitration system, it gets very difficult for one or a group of people to become immune for their actions. I don't expect everyone to understand legal philosophy and practice this stuff on their own. There's a GUI to facilitate this, and we'll get into that later. So with these changes, what happens? Well, lobbying has no choke point. It turns into advertising. And the only way to fund these public projects now is to convince as many people who are willing to donate and kick in on it, even if it's by a contractual subscription or some type. The processes where corruption exists are automated, and wherever the process requires accountability, we air gap that process and we put a human in there. That's how we're going to get our accountability. Sane limits are placed on where law can come into your life because you're the one who's going to put it there, and you're going to be financially accountable for the laws you do bring there, so you'll get a much better feedback as to what looks like an intelligent idea in society. Voting and all the expense and logistics and fraud that go along with that disappear because we don't really need it anymore. The situation works for Republicans and Democrats. At least in theory, the system works for everyone except for people who can't keep their hands to themselves. It provides long-term legal stability, which is really good for the economy when people can make 15 and 20-year contracts and they know that nothing else can interrupt that 15 or 20-year contract except some sort of default process or natural disasters. But there's no real way to legally change people's processes. That's a very good economic place to be as far as providing stability for hundreds of millions, if not billions of people. So we're all putting our money in these crowdfunding buckets now in the things that we want to be involved in, so there's no arguing about what's getting funded or why or how. The services we're going to contract from are established businesses, very similar to the way the government uses most of its services today. Those businesses are going to have executives who have had to do the work of running a business and are capable of even bidding on these contracts. This will net far greater executive talent than a process of someone who can schmooze the most amount of people into believing that they're going to do the right thing. Not to mention, we can replace them as fast as they screw up instead of having some sort of cycle where we can get rid of these people. It's essentially tenure and we're going to nix it. By selecting our executives this way, they are incentivized to conduct themselves and the business in a manner you'd expect and you'd support with your money. So we already discussed how the Brehon arbitration system would work. It would be very difficult for everyone to grasp those concepts without some aid. So there's a GUI to help make the process a little more simple. We take all the terms and we hang them in a wire work. and we can make them look like stars in the night sky. It doesn't really matter. The point is that each definition and each term is unique, and we'll go through and make sure each has its own defining characteristics, and no two are the same. Because we don't allow the stars to move and they're unique, we can now mathematically fix them in this framework. And we're going to use that to three-dimensionally diagram a sentence. So now you see this sentence hanging there, and every piece of it is visually displayed before you, and clearly the point of this sentence is that it was stolen. All of the things in this sentence revolve around that point, and they can be logically and rationally justified or grammatically justified why they are there, and we can use those lines and give them texture and content. The point is we can do this a whole lot of ways, but it will cut down on the level of confusion we have amongst our communication. I'm kind of blaming the Frankfurt School on this one, but this should be about as difficult to learn as Super Mario Brothers, and should help get rid of all of the confusion that we really have in our communication, especially in a legal process, for us to just communicate simply with each other. This model provides for transition by displacement, not destruction of the current system. And instead of having a large geographical migration, we're having an administrative migration. We've lived through one of these already. It's the Berlin Wall all over again. The conclusion is that a mechanical change of the system is required before any effective change is actually going to be seen in the system. The administrative shuffling has a very high ROI and is probably worth exploring. Thank you very much for watching this presentation. My contact information is on the last slide.